Solving absolute value equations and inequalities. To solve these, there's a few basic steps. First thing you do is you solve the equation or the inequality for the absolute value portion. Then you get rid of the absolute value and split things up. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is solve for this. Solve for the absolute value. Step 1. So I need to get rid of the 2. So I subtract the 2 from both sides, giving me the absolute value of x equals 9 minus 2, which is 7. Now, when you have absolute values, so this is step 1. Step 2 is to split absolute value. Alright, so what I mean by that is you split it into x equals a positive 7 or x equals a negative 7. And in this case, whatever is inside the absolute value, that is what goes here. So you might have to solve more after that, but in this case we are done. And our final answer is x equals 7 or x equals negative 7. So that's your answer. This next one's going to have a few extra things. We're already solved for absolute value, so step 1 is done. It's already solved for the absolute value. Step 2 is to split it. So let's do that. So we're going to split it and set it equal to positive 20 and set it equal to negative 20. So that would be 100 minus 20t is equal to positive 20, or 100 minus 20t is equal to negative 20. So that's step 2, splitting it up. So now we've split it up. So technically we have a step 3 on this one, solving for our variables. Okay, you won't always have that step 3, but this time we do. Alright, so step 3, I'm going to start by isolating the t, so I need to subtract 100 from both sides, giving me negative 20t equals 20 minus 100, which is a negative 80. And then I need to divide by negative 20, both sides. So t equals negative 80 divided by negative 20, which is a positive 4. And the other part, subtract 100 from both sides. And this is a 20, not a 2. So I'm subtracting 100, and that's going to give me negative 20 minus 100 here. So I get negative 20t equals a negative 120. So I need to solve for t by dividing by negative 20, both sides, and that would give me t equals a positive 6. So my final answer is t equals 4 or t equals 6, and that's your final answer. Example 3, we have 3x minus 6 in the absolute value minus 5 equals negative 7. So I'm going to start by solving for the absolute value. So I need to add 5 to both sides. So I have the absolute value of 3x minus 6 equals a negative 2. Now, absolute values cannot be negative. It's not possible. That's why we use absolute values, to make them positive numbers. So, since this is a negative number, since it equals a negative number, there is no solution. So in this case, if this happens and you have the absolute value and it equals a negative number, then you can just write no solution. Now, inequalities are a little bit different. When dealing with absolute values in inequalities, once you have solved for the absolute values, you need to write it first as is, so with whatever inequality it is and whatever sign it is. And then for the second part, you need to flip the inequality and flip the sign. Okay, so if we have a less than or equal to statement, that is less than, or equal to statement, either one of those two types of statements, then the word that you're going to use in between in your final answer is and. It's an and statement. Both of those things are true. And if it's a greater than or equal to sign, then the word you use in your answer is or. One of the two things is true. Both of them are not true. Okay, so those are the key things you need to remember to do. And once you have the inequality solved, then you do the first one with the positive number, and then you flip the sign and flip the inequality, and that's how you get your second part. And you add them and you connect them with one of these two words, and or the word or, depending on whether it's greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So we're going to look at a couple examples of the differences here. Number 4 says the absolute value of x minus 1 is less than 2. And number 5 says the absolute value of x minus 1 is greater than 2. So we're going to look at the differences. Okay, so if it's less than or equal to, then that means we're going to have and. So I know that in my answer I'm going to have to connect the two with the word and. Now I write it as is without the absolute value. X minus 1 is less than 2, and x minus 1 is greater than negative 2. Okay, so I flipped my sign and I flipped my sign. Okay, so you flip the inequality, you flip the sign. Flip them both. And now I solve. So I have x, if I add 1, is less than 3. And if I add 1 here, x is greater than negative 1. So that is my final answer. X is less than 3 and x is greater than negative 1. So for this next one, when dealing with a greater than or equal to, then that's going to imply that we connect with the word or. So we're going to write it as is without the absolute value. X minus 1 is greater than 2, or, because it's a greater than, x minus 1 is less than negative 2. Okay, so I flipped the inequality over and I flipped my sign from positive to negative. So what I have is, if I add the 1, x is greater than 3, or add the 1, x is less than negative 1. For this next example, we're going to start by figuring out what symbol we're going to use. So since it is a greater than or equal to, that means we're going to use the word or. So we're going to write it as 8n is greater than or equal to 24, or 8n is less than or equal to a negative 24. And then when we solve, we divide by 8, divide by 8, n is greater than or equal to 3, or n is less than or equal to negative 3. And that's your final answer. And you should be able to graph that, and they would go opposite directions. And for example 7, we have another absolute value to solve. So we have the absolute value of 2x plus 4 is less than 5. Okay, so since it's already solved for the absolute value, I'm just going to drop the absolute value, write it less than 5, and then I have to figure out whether it's and or 2x plus 4 is greater than negative 5. Okay, so to figure out what word goes in here, we look at the less than sign. So because it's less than, it's going to be and. If it's less than or equal to, we're going to write and. Alright, so then just solving here, I'm going to start with the 4, subtract 4, and I have 2x is less than 1. And then the next step is to get rid of the 2, so I divide by 2, and x is less than 1/2, and subtract the 4 over here, subtract the 4, and I have 2x is greater than negative 9. And then I have to divide by 2, so x is greater than negative 9 over 2. So your final answer is x is less than 1/2 and x is greater than negative 9/2. That's your final answer. So those are your notes over solving absolute value equations and inequalities. I'll go through the practice problems. Make sure you understand how to flip the signs and when to add the negatives and how to do that. And then you should be ready for your quiz.